Did you know that one of the world's most effective military surgeons for decades was someone whose biological sex, discovered only after death, would have barred them from medical school? Or that a Mongolian princess set a wrestling challenge for any man who wished to marry her, accumulating thousands of horses from defeated suitors? What if the true makeup of the stars was uncovered by a brilliant young woman, only for her to be told her findings were impossible by the leading men of science? Prepare to discover individuals whose stories of courage, intellect, and defiance echoed through history, often without the applause they deserved, and frequently achieved while standing singularly against the grain. Number 10. The woman who told the universe what it was made of, and almost no one believed her. Imagine looking up at the sun, that fiery ball in our sky. For centuries, learned people believed the sun and all the stars were made of mostly the same materials as our Earth. Think heavy elements, like iron perhaps. It seemed logical. But what if this long-held belief was completely wrong? What if a young woman in the early 20th century, using new tools and a brilliant mind, discovered the truth, a truth so fundamental it would reshape our understanding of the entire cosmos? This is the story of Cecilia Payne, later Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, born Cecilia Helena Payne in the town of Wendover, England, on May 10, 1900. Her early life was marked by a keen interest in the world around her. Her father, a London barrister, historian, and musician, passed away when she was only 4 years old. Her mother, Emma Leonora Helena, raised Cecilia and her 2 siblings. Cecilia's curiosity led her to pursue science. She won a scholarship to Newnham College, part of Cambridge University, in 1919. There, she studied botany, physics, and chemistry. However, a pivotal moment came when she attended a lecture by Sir Arthur Eddington. He was a renowned astronomer, and he spoke about his 1919 expedition to observe a solar eclipse, which provided evidence supporting Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity. This lecture ignited Cecilia's passion for astronomy. She reportedly said, "The result was a complete transformation of my world picture." At Cambridge, Cecilia Payne diligently completed her studies. Yet, in 1923, Cambridge University did not award degrees to women. She had done the work, met all requirements, but officially, she could not graduate with a degree. Faced with limited opportunities for women in science in England, Cecilia looked for options elsewhere. She learned of a new fellowship program at the Harvard College Observatory in Cambridge, Massachusetts, specifically aimed at encouraging women to study astronomy under its director, Harlow Shapley. She secured this fellowship and journeyed to the United States. The Harvard College Observatory at that time had a unique group of women known as the Harvard Computers. These women, including notable figures like Annie Junk Cannon and Henrietta Swan Leavitt, performed meticulous work. They examined countless photographic glass plates of stars, cataloging their positions, brightness, and spectra. Their contributions were foundational, yet they often worked for low pay and little recognition compared to male astronomers. Cecilia Payne, however, was not just a data processor. She was there to conduct research for her doctorate. Harlow Shapley gave her the ambitious task of determining the chemical composition of stars by analyzing their spectra. When starlight is passed through a spectrograph, it splits into a rainbow of colors interrupted by dark or bright lines. These spectral lines act like fingerprints, revealing the elements present in the star and their physical conditions. For 2 years, Cecilia Payne immersed herself in this complex task. She meticulously examined hundreds of thousands of stellar spectra. Crucially, she was one of the first to apply the new theories of quantum mechanics, particularly the work of Indian physicist Mehmed Saha on thermal ionization of elements, to understand the relationship between a star's spectral lines and its temperature and chemical makeup. Her calculations led her to a revolutionary conclusion. She discovered that hydrogen was overwhelmingly the most abundant element in the stars, by a factor of about 1,000,000 compared to heavier elements like iron or calcium. Helium was the second most abundant. This was a radical departure from the prevailing scientific consensus, which held that stars had a chemical composition similar to Earth's. In 1925, Cecilia Payne presented her findings in her doctoral dissertation, titled Stellar Atmospheres. The work was groundbreaking in its methodology and scope. However, her conclusion about the dominance of hydrogen met strong resistance from the astronomical establishment. Henry Norris Russell, an eminent American astronomer and director of the Princeton University Observatory, was one of her dissertation readers. He was a leading authority on stellar composition, and he firmly believed that stars and Earth shared similar elemental abundances. Russell advised Payne that her results showing such a high proportion of hydrogen were clearly impossible, and persuaded her to downplay this finding in her thesis. Imagine the pressure on a young scientist, a woman in a field dominated by men challenging the views of such a respected figure. In her published thesis, while presenting her evidence for hydrogen's abundance, Payne added a cautious remark suggesting that the surprisingly high abundance she calculated was almost certainly not real. Despite this compromise, her dissertation was widely recognized for its brilliance. Otto Struve, another prominent astronomer who would later become director of several major observatories, called it undoubtedly the most brilliant Ph.D. thesis ever written in astronomy. Cecilia Payne received her doctorate from Radcliffe College, then the women's college affiliated with Harvard, as Harvard itself did not grant doctoral degrees to women until much later. It was the first Ph.D. in astronomy awarded by Radcliffe. What happened to her impossible finding? Just 4 years later, in 1929, Henry Norris Russell, using different lines of reasoning and further evidence, arrived at the same conclusion. Stars are indeed primarily composed of hydrogen. He published his findings, and at the time he was often given the primary credit for this major discovery. To his credit, Russell did acknowledge Payne's earlier work in his paper. Science, through its slow and sometimes winding path, eventually confirmed Cecilia Payne's initial revolutionary insight. Cecilia Payne continued her career at Harvard, but recognition and advancement came slowly. For many years after her doctorate, despite her groundbreaking research and teaching activities, she held relatively low-paid and low-status positions, such as technical assistant to Harlow Shapley. Her courses were not even listed in the Harvard course catalog under her name until 1945. It was not until 1956, over 3 decades after her doctorate, that Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, as she was then known after her marriage in 1934 to Russian émigré astronomer Sergei Gaposchkin, was appointed a full professor at Harvard. This made her the first woman to achieve that rank from within the faculty in Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences. She also later became the first woman to chair a department at Harvard University, serving as chair of the Department of Astronomy from 1956 to 1960. Throughout her long career, Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, often in collaboration with her husband, conducted extensive research on variable stars, stellar magnitudes, and the structure of the Milky Way galaxy. She authored, or co-authored, several books and over 350 scientific papers. She successfully raised 3 children while pursuing her demanding scientific work. She received numerous awards in her later life, including the Henry Norris Russell Lectureship of the American Astronomical Society in 1976. She passed away on December 7, 1979, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her fundamental discovery that hydrogen is the primary constituent of stars and thus of the visible universe remains a cornerstone of modern astrophysics. It took a single determined individual, against prevailing wisdom to unveil this cosmic truth. Number 9. The sky was her only limit, but the ground was full of obstacles. In the early days of aviation, flying was a spectacle, a daring feat reserved for the brave and the few. Imagine then a young African American and Native American woman in the early 1920s dreaming not just of flying but of soaring through the skies as a licensed pilot. The barriers were immense. Racial discrimination was legal and widespread, and gender roles were tightly constricted. Yet, Bessie Coleman, born into poverty in rural Texas, decided she would fly. Her story is one of extraordinary determination against staggering odds. Elizabeth Bessie Coleman was born on January 26, 1892 in Atlanta, Texas. She was the 10th of 13 children born to George Coleman, who was of mixed African American and Native American Choctaw heritage, and Susan Coleman, an African American woman. Her early life was one of hard work and limited opportunities. Her father left the family in search of better prospects in Oklahoma when Bessie was young, leaving Susan to raise the children. Bessie grew up picking cotton and attending a small, segregated one-room school. She was a bright student and an avid reader, managing to graduate from the 8th grade. Around 1915, at the age of 23, Bessie moved to Chicago to live with her brothers. She worked as a manicurist in a barber shop, a job that exposed her to stories from soldiers returning from World War I who had seen airplanes in action in Europe. Her brother John, who had served in France, would tease her, saying that women in France were allowed to fly airplanes, and American women, especially black women, were not. These taunts, instead of discouraging Bessie, ignited a fire in her. She decided she wanted to become a pilot. However, her ambition quickly ran into a wall of prejudice. No flight school in the United States would admit her because she was African American, and also because she was a woman. Undeterred, Bessie sought advice. Robert S. Abbott, the founder and publisher of the influential African American newspaper, the Chicago Defender, encouraged her to go to France. He, along with Jesse Binga, a prominent black banker, provided her with financial support. Bessie began studying French at night, saved her money, and in November 1920, she sailed for France. In France, she was accepted into the Caudron Brothers School of Aviation in Le Crotoy. Here she learned to fly in a Newport Type 82 biplane, a notoriously unreliable aircraft. The training was dangerous. Another student in her class died in a plane crash. Bessie persisted through the 7-month course. On June 15, 1921, Bessie Coleman received her international pilot's license from the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale. This made her the first African American woman and the first Native American to earn an aviation pilot's license. She was also the first African American person to earn an international aviation license. She returned to the United States in September 1921. A sensation. Press, particularly the black press, hailed her as Queen Bess or Brave Bessie. She understood that to make a living as a pilot, she needed to become a stunt flyer, a barnstormer, performing daring aerial maneuvers for paying audiences. To hone these skills, she returned to Europe in February 1922 for further advanced training in France and Germany. She learned from German ace pilots and even reportedly received instruction from Anthony Fokker, one of the world's leading aircraft designers. Back in the United States, Bessie Coleman launched her career as an exhibition flyer. Her first American air show was on September 3, 1922 at Curtis Field near New York City, an event sponsored by the Chicago Defender. She captivated audiences with her daring loops, figure eights, and near-ground dips. She became a popular attraction, touring the country and drawing large crowds, both black and white. However, she was acutely aware of the racial segregation of her time. Bessie made a principled stand. She refused to perform at venues that segregated audiences or prohibited African Americans from attending. On one occasion, in her home state of Texas, she refused to perform unless the organizers agreed to have a single entrance for all spectators rather than separate ones for blacks and whites. They eventually complied, though seating inside remained segregated. Bessie Coleman's ultimate dream was to open her own flight school where other African Americans, particularly women, could learn to fly. She used her airshow earnings and speaking engagements, where she showed films of her flights, to raise money for this goal. She was a fanatic figure, inspiring many with her courage and ambition. She was known for her quote, "The air is the only place free from prejudices." Tragically, her life and dreams were cut short. On April 30th, 1926, Bessie Coleman was in Jacksonville, Florida, preparing for an air show. She was taking a test flight in a newly acquired Curtiss Gen-4 Jenny biplane. Her mechanic and publicity agent, William Wills, was piloting the plane. Bessie was in the passenger seat, and as was common for pilots at the time to better survey the terrain for a parachute jump, she was not wearing her seatbelt. About 10 minutes into the flight, at an altitude of around 3,000 feet, the plane unexpectedly went into a dive and then a spin. Bessie was thrown from the aircraft and died instantly upon hitting the ground. She was 34 years old. William Wills also died when the plane crashed. It was later discovered that a loose wrench had slid into the open cockpit's gate, jamming the controls. Bessie Coleman never married and had no children. Her life was singularly focused on her passion for aviation and her goal of creating opportunities for others. Though she did not live to establish her school, her legacy inspired generations of African American aviators. Aero clubs named in her honor sprang up across the country. In 1929, William J. Powell established the Bessie Coleman Aero Club in Los Angeles. Lieutenant William J. Powell also published Black Wings in 1934, a book dedicated to her memory. Her impact was profound, paving the way for future pioneers like the Tuskegee Airmen and Dr. Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman in space who carried a picture of Bessie Coleman with her on her first shuttle mission. Bessie Coleman's story is a testament to an individual who, facing nearly insurmountable barriers, reached for the sky and for a brief, brilliant time touched. Number 8. The Kenyan woman who rallied a nation with sacred oaths and a mother's fury. In the early 20th century, the British Empire was expanding its control across East Africa. Colonial administrators arrived, imposing new laws, taxes, and labor demands upon indigenous populations. In Kenya, among the Giriama people, this encroachment sparked resistance. The heart of this resistance was a Matic widow named Mekatilili Wamenza. She was not a queen or a general in the traditional sense, but her powerful oratory, her fearless defiance, and her invocation of traditional spiritual practices mobilized her people against colonial rule. Mekatilili Wamenza was born in the 1840s or 1860s. Records from that time are not precise. In the Kilifi district of Kenya's coastal region, she was a member of the Giriama, one of the 9 Mijikenda ethnic groups. Little is known about her early life, except that she was married and had a son, Katalili, from whom her name Mekatilili, meaning mother of Katalili, is derived. By the time she rose to prominence, she was a widow. This status in some African societies could afford women a degree of independence and authority. The Giriama way of life was being profoundly disrupted by British colonial policies. British administration sought to control trade, impose hut taxes, and recruit Giriyama men for forced labor on European-owned plantations and public works projects. There were also attempts to force the Giriyama to move from their ancestral lands. These policies threatened their economic independence, social structures, and spiritual connection to their land. Around 1912 and 1913, discontent among the Giriyama reached a boiling point. Cecilia Payne emerged as a key leader of the resistance. She was known for her powerful public speaking and her ability to inspire people. She traveled extensively throughout Giriyama territory, from village to village, often accompanied by another resistance leader, Wanya Wamadori. They held large public meetings, known as barazas, to rally support against the British. One of Mekatilili's most famous tactics was the Kafudu Oath. This was a traditional Giriyama sacred oath, sworn by men which bound them to collective action and secrecy. By administering the Kafudu Oath, Mekatilili united Giriyama, warriors and elders in their commitment to resist British demands. She would call upon the spirits of Giriyama ancestors and invoke the sacredness of their traditions to underscore the importance of their struggle. Her message was clear. The British were destroying their way of life, and they had to fight back. She is famously quoted as having said, "My Mulungu, God, is a Giriyama Mulungu. Your Mulungu is a white man's Mulungu. I will not pay taxes. I will not give you my young men to work for you and carry your loads. We are Giriyama and we will not move from our lands." Her defiance was direct and fearless. In August 1913, Arthur Champion, the British Assistant District Commissioner, held a meeting with Giriyama elders to demand their cooperation. Mekatilili attended this meeting. Accounts say she was confrontational, even performing a karinga, a traditional Giriyama funeral dance that involved ecstatic movement and chanting, which was seen as a direct challenge to colonial authority. Some historical accounts claim she even slapped the British administrator, or that she owned a hen and chicks, and when the administrator asked her why she would not pay tax, she asked him if he had ever seen a hen pay tax for its chicks. The hen represented her, and the chicks represented the Giriyama people. The British administration viewed Mekatilili as a dangerous agitator. In October 1913, Mekatilili and Wanya Wamadori were arrested. They were exiled to Kisii, in western Kenya, hundreds of miles away from their homeland. This was a common colonial tactic to neutralize troublesome local leaders. However, about 5 or 6 months later, in early 1914, Mekatilili and Wanya achieved an extraordinary feat. They escaped from their detention in Kisii and trekked all the way back to Giriyama territory, a journey of over 600 miles, around 1,000 kilometers, through unfamiliar and often hostile terrain. Their return reignited the resistance. The Giriyama, inspired by Mekatilili's return and continued defiance, began an armed struggle known as the Giriyama Uprising or the Kondo ya Mekatilili, Mekatilili's War. They attacked symbols of colonial authority, refused to pay taxes, and resisted labor recruitment. The British responded with overwhelming force. They launched a punitive expedition, burning villages, confiscating livestock, an estimated 5,000 head of cattle, 7,000 sheep and goats, and destroying crops. The Giriyama, armed mostly with traditional weapons like bows and arrows, were no match for British machine guns. The uprising was brutally suppressed by November 1914. Many Giriyama people died, and their economy was devastated. Mekatilili Payne was arrested again. This time, she was exiled even further away, to Kismayu in present-day Somalia. The British also imposed a fine on the Giriyama community and forced them to relocate. After the end of World War I, around 1919, Mekatilili was eventually allowed to return to Giriyama land. She lived out the rest of her life relatively quietly, though she remained a respected figure. She passed away around 1924 or 1925 and was buried in Ulaya Wajelabungail in the Magarini constituency of Malindi. For many years, Mekatilili Wamenza's story was largely forgotten outside her community, overshadowed by later nationalist movements in Kenya. However, in recent decades, her role as a key figure in early resistance to colonial rule has been increasingly recognized. She is celebrated as a hero who fought for the dignity and freedom of her people. Statues have been erected in her honor, and cultural festivals are held to commemorate her. Mekatilili Wamenza, a widow who became a powerful voice of resistance, demonstrates the profound impact one individual, driven by a sense of justice and a deep connection to her culture, can have in the face of overwhelming power. Her single determined stand inspired a people. Number 7. The surgeon with a secret that could have destroyed a groundbreaking medical career. Imagine a highly respected and sometimes feared British Army medical officer serving across the vast reaches of the empire in the 19th century. This individual performed one of the first successful cesarean sections in Africa where both mother and child survived, reformed hospital conditions, clashed with authorities like Florence Nightingale over best practices, and rose to the rank of Inspector General of Hospitals. Now, imagine this entire distinguished career was built upon a profound secret that Dr. James Barry was assigned female at birth. Dr. James Barry was likely born as Margaret Ann Bulkeley in Ireland around 1789, though some sources suggest 1792 or 1795. The exact details of Barry's early life are shrouded in some mystery, which is perhaps intentional. Margaret Bulkeley grew up in Cork. Her family faced financial difficulties. Her uncle was James Barry, a renowned Irish painter and professor of painting at London's Royal Academy. It appears that after her uncle's death, a plan was hatched by progressive-minded friends of his, including General Francisco de Miranda, a Venezuelan revolutionary, and David Stuart Erskine, the 11th Earl of Buchan. These influential figures seem to have conspired to enable young Margaret, who was clearly intelligent and ambitious, to obtain a medical education, something entirely impossible for a woman at that time. Sometime around 1809, Margaret Ann Bulkeley ceased to exist publicly, and James Barry, a young man, appeared. With this new identity, James Barry enrolled at the University of Edinburgh Medical School. Barry was described as being short in stature, with a slight build, a high-pitched voice, and a smooth complexion. Despite these features, which sometimes drew comment, Barry successfully completed medical studies, obtaining a doctorate of medicine in 1812. The dissertation topic was Demerose vel hernia crurale, on femoral hernia. After qualifying, Barry joined the British Army in 1813 as a hospital assistant. This was the beginning of a long and epical military medical career that spanned over 4 decades. Barry served in various posts across the British Empire, including Cape Town in South Africa, Mauritius, Trinidad and Tobago, Malta, Corfu, Jamaica, and Canada. It was in Cape Town, South Africa, where Barry served from 1816 to 1828, that some of the most significant medical achievements occurred. Barry was deeply concerned with public health and sanitation. Upon arrival, Barry was shocked by the poor state of the hospitals and the general lack of hygiene. Barry implemented sweeping reforms, improving sanitation, diet for patients, and conditions for both soldiers and the local population, including slaves and prisoners. Barry also advocated for better water systems for Cape Town. One of Barry's most celebrated achievements was performing what is believed to be the first successful cesarean section in Africa by a European surgeon in which both mother and child survived. This occurred around 1826 on a Mrs. Thomas Munnick. The child was named James Barry Munnick in the doctor's honor, and the name was passed down through generations. Dr. Barry was known for a fiery temper and a sharp tongue. Barry was a strict disciplinarian when it came to medical standards and would not hesitate to challenge superiors or established practices if they were deemed inadequate or harmful to patients. This often led to conflict with colonial authorities and military officials. Barry was involved in several official inquiries and even fought at least one pistol duel, though accounts vary if shots were actually exchanged or if it was a de-escalated affair. Barry was also known for a distinctive appearance, often wearing a long overcoat, regardless of the weather, and high-heeled boots, possibly to appear taller. Barry was accompanied by a small dog, often a poodle, and a black servant named John. Despite the sometimes controversial personality, Barry's medical skills were widely respected. Barry was promoted to Surgeon Major in 1827, and later to Deputy Inspector General of Hospitals in 1851, and finally, Inspector General of Hospitals in 1857, stationed in Canada. This was one of the highest medical ranks in the British Army. Throughout this career, Barry continued to advocate for better healthcare, improved conditions for soldiers, lepers, and prisoners, and proper sanitation. There is even an account of a famous argument with Florence Nightingale in Scutari during the Crimean War, where Barry criticized the hospital conditions she was working to improve, suggesting Barry had already implemented better standards elsewhere. Nightingale, unaware of Barry's lifelong secret, later described Barry as a brute. Dr. James Barry retired in 1859, reportedly against Barry's wishes, due to ill health and old age. Barry returned to London and passed away on July 25, 1865, from dysentery. The secret of Barry's biological sex was discovered only after death. The charwoman, Sophia Bishop, who prepared the body for burial, claimed that Barry was a perfect female and also showed signs of having given birth at some point in life. This latter claim is unsubstantiated by other evidence and highly debated by historians. When the charwoman reported her findings, the military authorities were shocked and embarrassed. They sought to suppress the information. Dr. Dart McKinnon, the military surgeon who signed Barry's death certificate, claimed he had not examined the body closely enough to notice anything unusual, though he later admitted he had an impression that Dr. Barry was a hermaphrodite. The Army sealed Barry's service records for 100 years. No official investigation was conducted. Dr. James Barry never married and appears to have lived a solitary personal life, dedicated entirely to a medical career. The immense courage and determination it must have taken to live as a man for over 50 years, to pursue a demanding profession forbidden to women, and to achieve such distinction is extraordinary. Barry's actions directly saved lives and improved healthcare for thousands. The motivations, whether primarily for professional ambition, personal identity, or a combination, remain a subject of historical discussion. What is undeniable is that James Barry was a pioneering medical professional whose singular life challenged the rigid gender norms of the 19th century, leaving a legacy of medical reform and a truly remarkable and for a long time unsung personal story. Number 6. The spy who was a he, then a she, and always a puzzle. Imagine a decorated war hero, a brilliant diplomat, and a notorious spy in 18th century Europe, who lived the first half of their life as a man, and the second half, by order of the King of France, as a woman. This individual charmed courts, negotiated secret treaties, engaged in sword fights, and became a subject of immense public fascination and speculation. This is the story of Charles Genevieve Louis Auguste André Timothy Dion de Beaumont, known as the Chevalier Dion. Born on October 5, 1728, in Tonner, Burgundy, France, to a noble family. Dion was recorded as male at birth and raised as a boy. Dion was highly intelligent, graduating with a law degree from the College Mazarin in Paris in 1749. Jean's early career included work as a royal censor and secretary to an administrator of the fiscal department. Jean's life took a dramatic turn around 1756 when recruited into the Secret du Roi, the King's Secret, a secret network of spies and diplomats run personally by King Louis d'Exville. This network operated often without the knowledge of the official French government. Jean's first major assignment was to Russia. To the court of Empress Elizabeth, the mission was delicate: to re-establish diplomatic relations and potentially negotiate a secret alliance against Prussia during the 7 Years' War. Some popular, though not definitively proven accounts, suggest Dion initially went to Russia disguised as a woman, Leah de Beaumont, to gain closer access to the Empress. Whether this early cross-dressing occurred or is a later embellishment, Dion was successful in the mission. Jean later served with distinction as a captain of dragoons in the French army during the later stages of the 7 Years' War, demonstrating bravery in battle and even being wounded. After the war, in 1762, Dion was sent to London as part of the embassy, negotiating the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the conflict. Dion was so effective and charming that after the ambassador returned to France, Dion was appointed minister plenipotentiary, effectively the interim ambassador. Jean was awarded the Order of St. Louis in 1763, becoming Chevalier d'Eon. However, Dion's time in London became complicated. A new ambassador, the Comte de Guerchy, was appointed, and Dion was demoted to secretary. Dion felt slighted and believed Guerchy was trying to ruin or even kill him. Dion refused to return to France, fearing imprisonment or worse. This led to a period of open conflict with the French government. Dion published secret diplomatic correspondence to defend these actions, causing a scandal. Critically, Dion held on to certain secret documents related to a potential French invasion of Britain, using them as leverage. During this period in London, starting around 1770, rumors began to circulate about the Chevalier's true sex. Jean's somewhat androgynous appearance, coupled with a refusal to confirm or deny the speculations, fueled intense public curiosity and even betting pools on the London Stock Exchange about Dion's gender. For several years, Dion neither fully embraced a female identity nor strongly refuted the rumors while continuing to dress as a man. In 1774, Louis V died. The new king, Louis d'Exville, was eager to resolve the Dion situation and recover the sensitive state papers. Negotiations were opened, primarily through the playwright Pierre de Beaumarchais. Dion agreed to return the documents in exchange for a royal pension. However, there was a significant condition attached by the French crown, likely influenced by the ongoing public speculation and Dion's own assertions during this period. Dion was to officially declare as female and, crucially, to dress and live as a woman for the remainder of their life. Dion signed a formal statement in 1777, attesting to being anatomically female and having been raised as a boy for reasons of inheritance. The French government provided funds for a new, appropriate female wardrobe. So, from 1777 onwards, the Chevalier d'Eon, who had been a soldier and diplomat as a man, began living publicly as Mademoiselle d'Eon. Dion returned to France, initially living in the family home in Tonnerre. Transition was not always easy. Dion sometimes chafed under the restrictions of female attire and societal expectations for women. When the French Revolution broke out in 1789, Dion's royal pension was stopped. Dion returned to England in 1785, before the revolution fully erupted, and remained there for the rest of their life. To earn a living, Dion participated in fencing exhibitions, still a skilled swordsperson, despite the cumbersome female attire. Dion also attempted to sell personal possessions, including a vast library. Dion even offered to lead a division of female soldiers for the French revolutionary government, an offer that was declined. The Chevalier Dion lived in relative poverty in later years, often with a companion, Mrs. Cole. Dion died in London on May 21, 1810, at the age of 81. Upon Dion's death, a post-mortem examination was conducted by a group of doctors and witnesses. They discovered that the Chevalier was, according to their report, anatomically male. This revelation caused a final wave of public sensation. The Chevalier Dion never married. The reasons for Dion's complex gender presentation remain a subject of historical and biographical debate. Was it a strategic choice for espionage, a way to navigate difficult political situations, a deeply felt personal identity, or a combination of factors? The Chevalier's life was one of extraordinary contrasts and singular experiences, defying easy categorization. Dion's story highlights the fluidity and complexity of identity, played out on a grand historical stage, and the remarkable life of an individual who was in many senses utterly unique and certainly unsung for the full baffling complexity of their existence. Number 5. The sister who scanned the heavens and found her own stars. In the glow of the Age of Enlightenment, when science was making giant leaps, the world of astronomy was largely a male domain. Yet quietly and diligently working, often in the shadow of her famous brother, was a woman who became a significant astronomer in her own right. She was the first woman to discover a comet, the first woman to be paid for her scientific work in Britain, and a meticulous cataloger of the stars. This is Caroline Herschel. Caroline Lucretia Herschel was born on March 16, 1750, in Hanover, Germany. Her childhood was difficult. At age 10, she suffered from typhus, which stunted her growth. She never grew beyond 4 feet 3 inches. The illness also damaged her left eye. Her father, Isaac Herschel, a musician in the Hanoverian Guards, encouraged all his children, including his daughters, to learn music, mathematics, and French. However, her mother, Anna Ilse, believed Caroline's destiny was to be a domestic servant and actively discouraged her more academic pursuits, wanting her to focus on household chores. Caroline's life changed dramatically when her older brother, William Herschel, who had moved to England and established himself as a musician and music teacher in Bath, invited her to join him. In August 1772, at the age of 22, Caroline left Hanover for England. Initially, her role was to manage William's household and assist him in his musical career. She trained as a singer and became a principal soprano in his oratorio performances, achieving some local acclaim. However, William's passion was increasingly turning from music to astronomy. He became obsessed with observing the night sky and, dissatisfied with available telescopes, began to build his own, much larger and more powerful instruments. Caroline became his indispensable assistant in this all-consuming endeavor. Her days were filled with grinding and polishing mirrors for telescopes, a physically demanding and meticulous task, and her nights were spent helping William with his observations. She would sit by an open window even in freezing temperatures, recording his observations as he called them out from his telescope, often working until dawn. She also performed the complex mathematical calculations needed to process the raw data. While assisting William, Caroline began to make her own astronomical observations. William built her a small refracting telescope specifically for sweeping the skies for comets. On August 1, 1786, Caroline Herschel discovered her first comet, now designated C. 1786 P1. Herschel. This discovery brought her considerable fame, as she was the first woman to be credited with discovering a comet. She would go on to discover or co-discover at least 7 more comets over the next 11 years. In 1787, King George DI granted Caroline an annual salary of £50 in her own right as an official assistant to her brother William, who had by then been appointed the king's astronomer after his discovery of the planet Uranus in 1781. This was a landmark moment. Caroline Herschel became the first woman in Britain, and possibly the world at that time, to receive a salary for scientific work. It acknowledged her independent contributions, though it was a modest sum compared to William's £200 salary. Beyond comets, Caroline made significant contributions to the cataloging of stars and nebulae. She systematically checked and corrected the existing star catalog published by John Flamsteed, the first Astronomer Royal. She found numerous errors and omissions. She went on to produce her own supplementary catalog of 560 stars not included in Flamsteed's work, which was published by the Royal Society in 1798 under the title Catalogue of Stars, taken from Mr. Flamsteed's observations, contained in the second volume of the Historia Coelestis, and not inserted in the British catalogue. This was a hugely valuable resource for astronomers. She also compiled a general index of nebulae and clusters of stars observed by William, and later updated it. These catalogues were crucial tools for astronomical research. Caroline Herschel never married. She dedicated her life almost entirely to her brother and their shared scientific pursuits. Her devotion to William was profound. After William married a wealthy widow, Mary Pitt, née Baldwin, in 1788, Caroline's domestic role changed, and she moved to separate lodgings, though she continued her astronomical work with him. She maintained a detailed journal and letters that provide valuable insights into her life, her work, and the scientific community of her time. They reveal a woman of sharp intellect, dry wit, and immense dedication, but also someone who sometimes felt overshadowed and undervalued. After William's death in 1822, Caroline, then 72 years old, returned to Hanover, Germany. She did not abandon astronomy. She continued to work on organizing and verifying her brother's vast catalogue of nebulae, preparing it for her nephew John Herschel, who would carry on the family's astronomical legacy. For this work, the Royal Astronomical Society awarded her its gold medal in 1828. She was the first woman to receive this prestigious honor, and the only woman until Vera Rubin in 1996. In 1835, she and Mary Somerville were elected as the first female honorary members of the Royal Astronomical Society. She was also elected an honorary member of the Royal Irish Academy in 1838. Caroline Herschel lived to the remarkable age of 97, passing away on January 9, 1848, in Hanover. She was recognized in her later years with many accolades, including the Gold Medal for Science from the King of Prussia in 1846 on her 96th birthday. Her contributions were not just supportive of her brother's work. She was a notable astronomer in her own right. Her meticulous observations, her discovery of comets, and her painstaking cataloging work laid important groundwork for future astronomical research. Caroline Herschel, the diminutive woman who reached for the stars, proved that dedication and intellect could shine brightly, even in an era that offered few opportunities for women in science, all while navigating a life of singular devotion to her craft. Number 4. The American inventor who crossed an ocean alone for a patent. In the early 18th century, the American colonies were a place of rugged ingenuity, but the path for an inventor, especially a woman, to gain official recognition and protection for her ideas was almost non-existent. Yet, one woman from Philadelphia, driven by her inventive spirit and remarkable determination, not only developed a new process for preparing corn, but also journeyed across the Atlantic to England to secure a patent for it, becoming one of the first, if not the first, American woman to receive such a grant from the English crown. Her name was Cecilia Masters. Cecilia Payne was likely born around 1676 in Bermuda, though some accounts suggest she was born in New Jersey. Her family, who were Quakers, moved to Burlington Township, New Jersey, when she was young. Around 1692, Cecilia married Thomas Masters, a prosperous Quaker merchant and landowner from Philadelphia. They had several children. Thomas Masters was a prominent figure in Pennsylvania, serving as a mayor of Philadelphia and a provincial councilor. Cecilia Masters was clearly an inventive and enterprising woman. She observed the methods used by Native American women to process maize, corn. They would pound the corn by hand, using wooden or stone mortars and pestles to create meal or hominy. This was a laborious and time-consuming process. Cecilia conceived of a new mechanical method to clean and prepare corn kernels, producing a product she called Tuscarora rice. This name was likely chosen to evoke the Tuscarora people and to make the product sound more exotic and appealing, perhaps implying it was a new type of grain similar to rice. Her invention involved a stamping process, using horse or water power to crush the corn into fine particles, which could then be used for various culinary purposes. Recognizing the commercial potential of her invention, Cecilia sought to patent. However, in the American colonies at that time, there was no established patent system. Patents had to be obtained from England. Around 1712, Cecilia Masters traveled to London to pursue her patent application. This was an extraordinary undertaking for a woman of that era. Transatlantic voyages were long, dangerous, and expensive. For a woman to travel alone, or at least without her husband, on such a mission was highly unusual. It speaks to her determination and the support she likely received from her husband Thomas, who was clearly a partner in her endeavors. Patent process in England was complex and lengthy. Cecilia spent several years in London navigating the bureaucracy. It is documented that she presented her idea to King George I. Finally, on November 25, 1715, a patent was granted for a new invention for cleaning and curing the Indian corn growing in the several colonies of America. However, due to the legal restrictions on women owning property or patents independently, the patent was issued in her husband's name, Thomas Masters. Patent document itself, though clearly states that the invention was the sole invention and undertaking of Cecilia, his wife. This acknowledgement of her inventive role within the patent is significant. While in England, Cecilia Masters also developed another invention. This was a method for working and staining palmetto straw and chip for hats and bonnets, essentially a new way to process materials for millinery. She received a second patent for this invention, again in her husband's name, in February 1716. The patent described a method of weaving in a new method bonnets and hats, and covering the same with a mixture of straw and palmetto leaf silk, worsted, or any other material. After successfully securing her patents, Cecilia returned to Philadelphia. Thomas Masters established a mill, likely near Philadelphia, to produce Tuscarora rice, using Cecilia's patented process. Advertisements for Tuscarora rice appeared, promoting it as a cure for consumption, tuberculosis, and other distempers, claiming it was exceedingly nourishing and wholesome. It was sold in Philadelphia and also exported to England. Cecilia also opened a shop in London, run by an agent, that sold hats and bonnets made using her second patented method. Cecilia Masters passed away on August 20th, 1720, in Philadelphia. Her life demonstrates remarkable ingenuity and atomic spirit. She not only conceived of new technologies, but also possessed the tenacity to navigate complex legal and social systems to protect and commercialize her inventions. While the patents were issued in her husband's name, the official records explicitly credit her as the inventor. She stands as a pioneering figure for American inventors, particularly women, choosing a single-minded pursuit of her goals across continents. Her story remained relatively unsung for centuries, but highlights the early contributions of women to innovation and industry in colonial America. The fact that she undertook such a journey and persisted for years in a foreign land to secure recognition for her ideas curs her unique and heroic determination. Number 3. The princess poet who danced for her god and defied a kingdom. Imagine a royal princess in 16th century India, born into a life of luxury and strict societal expectations. She is expected to marry, uphold family honor, and live within the confines of palace walls and patriarchal traditions. Instead, she renounces worldly comforts, defies her powerful family, and declares her spiritual marriage to a god, becoming a wandering mystic and one of history's most beloved poet saints. This is the story of Mirabai. Mirabai, also known as Mirabai, was born around 1498 in Kudgi, a village in the Merta district of Rajasthan, India. She was a Rajput princess, a member of a martial ruling class known for its rigid codes of honor and conduct. Her father was Ratan Singh Rathore, and her grandfather, Rao Dudaji, was the ruler of Merta. Her upbringing was steeped in Vaishnavism, a tradition of Hinduism focused on the worship of Vishnu and his avatars, particularly Krishna. Legend says that, as a young child, Mirabai saw a wedding procession and innocently asked her mother who her husband would be. Her mother, perhaps half-jokingly, pointed to an idol of Lord Krishna and said he was her bridegroom. Mirabai took this to heart, developing an intense and personal devotion to Krishna from a very early age. In accordance with Rajput custom, Mirabai was married around 1516 to Bajraj, the crown prince of Mewar, one of the most powerful Rajput kingdoms. Her husband was the son of Maharana Sangram Singh, popularly known as Rana Sanga, a renowned warrior king. This marriage was a political alliance, common among royal families. However, Mirabai found it difficult to reconcile her wifely duties with her overwhelming spiritual devotion to Krishna, whom she considered her true husband. She spent much of her time in prayer, singing bhajans, devotional songs. She composed and, in the company of sadhus, holy men, and pilgrims, which was considered highly inappropriate for a Rajput princess and daughter-in-law of a prestigious royal family. Her open disregard for social conventions and her refusal to worship the family deity, preferring her devotion to Krishna, angered her in-laws. Accounts of her life, drawn from her poetry and hagiographies written centuries later, suggest she faced severe persecution. Her husband, Bajraj, died young, possibly in battle around 1521, or from illness a few years later. As a widow, societal expectations for Mirabai would have been even more restrictive. However, his death seems to have only deepened her spiritual resolve and her detachment from worldly affairs. After her husband's death, the opposition from her in-laws, particularly from the then Rana ruler of Mewar, Bikram Singh, her brother-in-law or step-brother-in-law, depending on the account, is said to have intensified. Legends abound about the attempts on her life. It is said that Bikram Singh tried to poison her by sending a cup of poisoned nectar, but when Mirabai drank it, offering it first to Krishna, it had no effect on her. Another story tells of a venomous snake sent to her in a basket of flowers, which miraculously transformed into a garland or an idol of Krishna when she opened it. These stories, whether literal truth or symbolic representations of her spiritual fortitude, highlight the immense pressure and danger she faced. Mirabai's poetry, composed in a simple, lyrical style in vernacular languages like Braj, Bhasha, and Rajasthani, expresses her deep love and longing for Krishna, her pain of separation, her defiance of societal norms, and her ecstatic joy in her devotion. Her songs, numbering in the hundreds or even over 1,000, are still sung widely across India today. They are a testament to her unwavering faith and her courage to live life on her own terms. She wrote lines like, "Rana, what will you get by killing me? My love for the divine is not a hidden thing. I will beat the drum and make it known." Unable to endure the persecution and constraints of the palace, Mirabai eventually left Mewar. She became a wandering ascetic, traveling to various holy places associated with Krishna, such as Vrindavan and Dwarka. She spent her time in temples, singing and dancing in ecstatic devotion, a behavior considered scandalous for a woman of her lineage. Her followers grew drawn by her sincerity, her beautiful poetry, and her fearless expression of love for God. She broke caste barriers and gender norms, interacting freely with people from all walks of life who shared her spiritual path. The details of her later life and death are, like much of her early life, shrouded in legend. It is generally believed that she spent her final years in Dwarka, a major pilgrimage site for Krishna devotees on the coast of Gujarat. One popular legend says that around 1547 she miraculously merged into the idol of Krishna in the Dwarkadish temple, thus achieving ultimate union with her beloved Lord. There is no precise historical record of her death. Mirabai's life was a singular act of rebellion against patriarchal and feudal structures, fueled by an all-consuming spiritual love. She chose a path of devotion that made her an outcast in her own royal society, but a beloved saint for millions. She never remarried after her husband's death, and her entire being was focused on her marriage to Krishna. Her legacy is not one of political power or military conquest, but of profound spiritual courage and artistic expression. She remains an enduring symbol of bhakti, devotional love, and a powerful female voice in a tradition often dominated by male saints and scholars. Her songs continue to inspire those who seek a personal connection with the divine, unmediated by rigid dogma or social hierarchy. Number 2. The warrior princess who wrestled her way out of marriage. In the vast windswept steppes of Central Asia during the late 13th and early 14th centuries, a remarkable woman carved out a legendary reputation. She was a princess, a warrior, and famously an undefeated wrestler who set a unique condition for her hand in marriage. Her name was Kutulin, and she was a formidable figure in the Mongol Empire, a woman who defied conventional roles and chose her own path. Kutulin was born around 1260. She was the daughter of Kaidu, a cousin of Kublai Khan, and a powerful ruler in his own right. Kaidu controlled a significant portion of Central Asia, including parts of modern-day Xinjiang, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, and was a staunch opponent of Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty in China. Kutulin was Kaidu's favorite child among his many offspring. He reportedly had 14 sons and her. She grew up in a culture that, while patriarchal, valued strength and skill in both men and women, particularly among the nomadic Mongols. From a young age, Kutulin displayed exceptional physical prowess and a warrior spirit. She was skilled in horse, riding, archery, and most notably, wrestling, a traditional Mongol sport. She often accompanied her father on military campaigns, riding into battle alongside him and his warriors. Historical accounts, including those by Marco Polo and Rashid al-Din Hamadani, a Persian historian who wrote extensively about the Mongols, describe her as a superb warrior, capable of riding into enemy ranks and snatching a captive as easily as a hawk snatches a chicken. Her father, Kaidu, deeply admired her abilities and trusted her counsel. He even wished to name her as his successor, a highly unusual desire in the Mongol world, though this was ultimately opposed by her brothers and other male relatives. The most famous stories about Kutulin revolve around her refusal to marry unless a suitor could defeat her in a wrestling match. This was her own condition. If the suitor lost, he had to forfeit a number of horses to her, typically 100. If he won, he would win her hand. Many ambitious and brave men, attracted by her beauty, her royal lineage, or perhaps the challenge itself, came to try their luck. None succeeded. Cuchulainn remained undefeated. According to Marco Polo, she accumulated a herd of 10,000 horses from these forfeited wagers. This vast wealth, won by her own strength, further enhanced her independence and legendary status. Marco Polo, who was in the service of Kublai Khan and therefore on the opposing side of Kaidu, described her vividly. She was so well made in all her limbs, and so tall and strongly built, that she might almost be taken for a giantess. She was so strong that there was no young man in the whole kingdom who could overcome her, but she vanquished them all. There is an account of one particularly wealthy and handsome prince who was determined to marry her. He wagered 1,000 horses on the outcome of their wrestling match. Kaidu and his wife reportedly urged Cuchulainn to let the prince win. Perhaps seeing a good political alliance or fearing she would remain unmarried, Cuchulainn, however, stayed true to her challenge. She wrestled the prince and defeated him, adding his 1,000 horses to her collection. Her insistence on this challenge and her continued unmarried status fueled rumors and speculation. Some suggested she had an incestuous relationship with her father, which Rashid al-Din explicitly refutes, stating that Cuchulainn eventually did marry to quell such malicious gossip. The identity of her husband is debated by historians. Some sources say she married a Mongol warrior named Abdukul from the Khoros clan. Other accounts suggest she married Ghazan Khan of Persia, or a man named Parsa. What seems clear is that if she did marry, it was on her own terms, and likely to someone she chose or who did not challenge her independent spirit excessively. Some scholars even suggest she never married, or that any marriage was brief or a political maneuver that didn't fundamentally alter her way of life. Cuchulainn remained a close confidant and supporter of her father throughout his campaigns against Kublai Khan and his successors. She was a symbol of the more traditional, nomadic Mongol way of life that Kaidu championed against the increasingly Sinicized Yuan dynasty. When Kaidu died in 1301, reportedly from wounds sustained in battle, Cuchulainn guarded his tomb with her troops. There was a power struggle among her brothers for succession. Kaidu had favored his son Horus, but also had expressed a wish for Cuchulainn to succeed him. Ultimately, her brother Chapar became Kaidu's successor. Cuchulainn's own life, after her father's death, is less clearly documented. She continued to be a powerful figure within Kaidu's faction, supporting her brother Horus. She died around 1306, though the circumstances of her death are not definitively known. Some sources suggest she died in battle, while others offer no specific cause. Cuchulainn's story is a remarkable example of a woman who defied the gender expectations of her time and culture, even within the relatively more egalitarian, for women in martial roles, Mongol society. She used her physical strength, intelligence, and warrior skills to carve out a space of autonomy and influence. Her legend, particularly her wrestling prowess and her bridal wager, has endured for centuries, inspiring adaptations in literature and opera such as Puccini's Turandot, where the princess sets riddles instead of wrestling matches. Cuchulainn was a truly singular individual, a warrior princess who literally fought for her independence, remaining largely unsung in wider world history despite her extraordinary life and the detailed accounts by contemporary chroniclers. Number 1. The woman of Alexandria who taught the empire and paid the ultimate price for her wisdom. In the bustling, intellectually vibrant city of Alexandria, in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, a woman stood as a beacon of learning and reason. She was a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer, respected by scholars and students from across the Roman Empire. Her name was Hypatia, and her pursuit of knowledge in a world of rising religious and political turmoil ultimately led to her tragic death, making her an enduring symbol of both intellectual freedom and the dangers of fanaticism. Hypatia was born in Alexandria, Egypt, likely between 350 and 370 AD. Alexandria was then a major center of Greek learning and culture within the Eastern Roman Empire. Her father was Theon of Alexandria, a renowned mathematician and astronomer, associated with the Motion, the great scholarly institution that had succeeded the famous Library of Alexandria. Theon educated Hypatia himself, providing her with a comprehensive grounding in mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and literature. It is clear he recognized and nurtured her exceptional intellect from a young age. Hypatia quickly surpassed many of her contemporaries and became a prominent public figure in Alexandria. She taught at the Neoplatonic school, a philosophical tradition that sought to synthesize the teachings of Plato with other Greek philosophical and mystical ideas. Her lectures were incredibly popular, drawing students from diverse backgrounds, pagans, Christians, and foreigners alike. She taught mathematics, including geometry and algebra, astronomy, possibly involving the use of astrolabes, which her father had written about, and philosophy. She was known for her eloquence, her clarity of thought, and her modesty. Contemporary sources, like the letters of her student Synesius of Cyrene, who later became a Christian bishop, speak of her with immense admiration and respect. Synesius referred to her as the philosopher and sought her advice on intellectual matters, including the construction of scientific instruments like an astrolabe and a hydroscope. He praised her wisdom, her virtue, and her skill as a teacher. Hypatia was not just a preserver of past knowledge, she likely contributed to it. While none of her written works survive directly, she is believed to have written commentaries on important mathematical texts, such as Diophantus's Arithmetica on algebra, Apollonius of Perga's Conicuts on conic sections, and possibly Ptolemy's astronomical works. She may have also assisted her father in his scholarly editions of Euclid's Elements and Ptolemy's Almagest. Hypatia never married and is believed to have embraced a life of celibacy, dedicating herself to scholarship and teaching. This was not uncommon for female philosophers in the Neoplatonic tradition, who often valued intellectual pursuits above conventional domestic roles. Her single status and her public role as an intellectual leader gave her a degree of independence and influence rarely afforded to women in that era. She moved freely in male-dominated academic and civic circles, and her counsel was sought by prominent citizens, including Orestes, the Roman prefect, governor of Alexandria. However, Alexandria in the early 5th century was a city rife with tension. There were bitter conflicts between different religious groups, pagans, Jews, and various Christian factions. Cyril, who became the Patriarch of Alexandria in 412 AD, was a powerful and often ruthless Christian leader, determined to assert Christian dominance in the city. He was involved in violent clashes with the Jewish community, leading to their expulsion from Alexandria, and he frequently clashed with the imperial prefect, Orestes. Hypatia, with her philosophical teachings that were not tied to any single religious dogma. Neoplatonism was seen as a form of Hellenic pagan philosophy by some Christians, and her close association with Orestes became caught in these dangerous political and religious crosscurrents. Orestes valued her wisdom and often consulted her. This friendship with the prefect and her perceived influence over him made her a target for Cyril's more fanatical supporters. Rumors began to spread that Hypatia was using her influence to prevent a reconciliation between Orestes and Cyril, and that she was practicing some form of sorcery. in March of 415 AD. During the Christian season of Lent, this animosity culminated in a horrific act of violence. A mob of Christian monks and supporters of Cyril, known as the Parabolani, incited by a lector named Peter, ambushed Hypatia as she was traveling through the city in her chariot. They dragged her from her carriage, took her to a church called the Caesareum, and there they brutally murdered her. Accounts, most notably by the 5th century Christian historian Socrates Scholasticus, state that they stripped her naked and then killed her using ostraca, which could mean roof tiles or oyster shells to flay her skin. They then dismembered her body and burned her remains. The murder of Hypatia sent shockwaves through Alexandria and beyond. Socrates Scholasticus, himself a Christian, condemned the act, writing, "Surely nothing can be farther from the spirit of Christianity than the allowance of massacres, fights, and transactions of that sort." While Cyril's direct involvement in ordering the murder is debated by historians, his inflammatory rhetoric and his conflict with Orestes undoubtedly created the climate in which such an atrocity could occur. Orestes reported the murder to the imperial government in Constantinople, but the investigation was likely hampered by Cyril's influence, and justice for Hypatia was never truly served. Hypatia's death is often seen as a tragic turning point, symbolizing the decline of classical learning and the rise of religious intolerance in the late Roman world, though scholarship continued in Alexandria for some time after. She became a martyr for philosophy and reason. Her legacy, though her own works are lost, lived on through her students and the accounts of her life and intellect. She remains an inspiration as a woman who achieved extraordinary intellectual prominence in a patriarchal society, a brilliant teacher who transcended religious divides in her pursuit of knowledge, and a victim of brutal fanaticism. Her singular dedication to the life of the mind and the horrifying price she paid for her wisdom and influence has made her an unsung hero for intellectual freedom across the ages.